Welcome to the swashbuckling seaside village of Robin Hood's Bay, a tiny settlement that was once a notorious hive of smuggling, nestled among the cliffs on the spectacular Yorkshire coast. Today a popular holiday spot, Robin Hood's Bay is a mind-bending maze of a village, home to a labyrinth of quaint, centuries-old lanes and cottages draped on the side of an achingly steep cliff. We'll take a walk through the dizzying network of alleyways in a moment, but we begin our walk down by the sea. As the village's name suggests, Robin Hood's Bay overlooks an expansive bay on the Yorkshire coast, with a small beach here at the bottom of the slipway. But as you can see, the bay is surrounded by enormous cliffs, which were crucial to the development of this village as a smuggler's paradise. In the 18th century, smuggling was rife all along the Yorkshire coast, but Robin Hood's Bay was arguably the most notorious place for illegal trade. Smugglers from continental Europe would take secretive, treacherous voyages across the North Sea, and arrive at this bay to offload their loot, with the cliffs around us providing essential protection from the prying eyes of authorities. Today, the bay isn't used for much smuggling, but rather fishing by locals, while the ends of the beach overlooked by the cliffs are also said to be great for fossil hunting, with much of the coastal landscape here dating back to the early Jurassic period. Here at the foot of Robin Hood's Bay village, meanwhile, we find ourselves before what looks like a large storm drain. In fact, this was the main entrance to a secret network of underground tunnels under the village, which smugglers would vanish into after arriving onto shore, in order to evade the eyes of the law. Later on, we'll get a look at where that tunnel pops out above ground, but for now we're passing the Old Coastguard Station, built here on the dock area of the village, known as Coble Head, in 1829. Originally, the Coastguard Station was built to deal with the smuggling problem in Robin Hood's Bay, giving the authorities a permanent lookout right above the place where illegal goods came in. However, as smuggling in the village subsided, the Coastguard Station remained in use. In winter, the waters off the coast here are notoriously cold and violent, and so lifeboats were launched from this point on Coble Head to rescue any fishermen in distress out in the bay. Adorning the old launching dock here is a list of achievements of the village's former lifeboats, which were historically operated by brave local volunteers. Over time, the Robin Hood's Bay lifeboat crews have saved countless lives, but the dangerous waters of the North Sea have often spilled onto the shore here, with the village having suffered numerous devastating floods. The most notable inundation of Robin Hood's Bay came in the year 1780, when the main route to this point from atop the cliffs fell into the sea. But many buildings predating that incident still survive, such as this old fisherman's cottage, built in 1680. Now, having made our way off Coble Head, we'll dive into the maze of higgledy-piggledy lanes that dominate Robin Hood's Bay. But let's first take a look at where you'd find this village on a map. As you can see, Robin Hood's Bay lies in an isolated part of the Yorkshire coast, at the edge of the wild North York moors, and about 5 miles south of the famous town of Whitby. The houses of Robin Hood's Bay, or simply Bay as the village is locally known, are built on top of one another along steep, narrow lanes on the village cliffs. Almost all of the houses that we see around us were built in the period from 1650 to 1820, which was the heyday of smuggling in Robin Hood's Bay. The building of these houses created the seemingly endless labyrinth of claustrophobic lanes and alleys that we see today, and which are a real headache to navigate. It's almost inevitable that you'll get lost at some point on a visit to Robin Hood's Bay, but by many measures, that's entirely deliberate. As we look out over this sea of roofs, the impenetrable nature of the village's layout gave an immense advantage to its residents, almost all of whom were at one point involved in the smuggling trade. Long-time locals of the village will know its streets like the back of their hand, but outsiders, including the authorities of the day, will almost always get lost. If being chased by the police, smugglers could therefore easily vanish into this maze of confusing streets, and even dash into a cottage somewhere, counting on the hospitality of a fellow resident. But among the labyrinthine lanes of Bay, we find one of the village's largest and newest buildings, the former Congregational church, which was built in 1840. Later used as a United Reformed Church, the building, which was somehow squeezed in between the houses, is an example of how Robin Hood's Bay continued to develop even after smuggling fell away in the 19th century. The core village here is very much a product of the 17th and 18th centuries, but up on top of the cliffs, a newer settlement emerged in the Victorian era, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later on. The long and illustrious history of Robin Hood's Bay goes back about 700 years to the 14th century, and you can learn about that in great detail at the village's museum here. The museum, which was founded in the late 20th century, is located inside the old Coroner's room, itself built in 1891. To its side, meanwhile, is the old mortuary, which was later converted into a local library and reading room. The museum, which is free to enter, is an example of how Robin Hood's Bay now caters well to visitors looking to explore its atmospheric lanes and captivating history. Tourism is very much the name of the game in Bay today, and the village now serves as a quaint holiday spot, a long way from its hardy origins of fishing and smuggling. Of course, as you'd expect, Robin Hood's Bay emerged initially as a fishing village, with a small group of inhabitants around the foreshore from the 14th century. Initially, cottages were built beneath the cliffs to shield against gales that were coming off the moors. However, cottages were often cramped and unsanitary, creating a tough existence for fishermen who worked day and night. But in 1885, the fortunes of Bay residents were transformed when a station was built on top of the cliffs on the line from Scarborough to Whitby. Providing locals with a quick link to the outside world for the first time, fishermen could trade their catches more widely, bringing them newfound wealth which they put to use by moving out of small cottages into larger, more modern Victorian houses near the station up on top of the cliffs. Most Victorian buildings in Robin Hood's Bay are found on top of the cliffs, but here we see one in the heart of the village, the former police station, which was built in 1886. The police station, now a holiday home, wasn't built due to smuggling, but rather an uptick in violence that came when the railway was being built. The line was built by navvies, strong builders who, on their days off, came down into Bay for a drink and a brawl. Fights on the beach became a weekly occurrence, and so the police stepped up their local presence to calm things down. However, after the railway was finished and the navvies moved on, the police station had little purpose to serve, and so closed down in 1938. We now find ourselves looking over King's Beck, the main stream which flows from the top of the moors down towards the sea here. It's also where the smugglers' tunnel that we saw by the sea pops out into clear air, and where illegal importers would then push forth towards the moors to bring their goods inland. While its location hidden under the cliffs made Robin Hood's Bay perfect for smuggling goods in from overseas, there are very few large settlements nearby where you'd have been able to sell the goods. So, there was an infamous smuggling road that led from Robin Hood's Bay across the moors to the town of Pickering, located about 20 miles inland. There, smugglers would sell off their loot, which was then bought and sold all across Britain. We'll talk more about smuggling and exactly why it overtook fishing as the main business here in Robin Hood's Bay. But we're now looking up New Road, the main road that leads into the village. New Road slopes steeply down from the cliff tops, and was built as a replacement for the old main route into Bay, which was located a little to the east of here, and which, as we mentioned, fell into the sea in 1780. If you're visiting Robin Hood's Bay today, you'll be entering with a walk down this excruciatingly steep road, from the car park that sits at the top of the cliff. As we make our way past the Laurel Inn, the smallest pub in Robin Hood's Bay, it's important to remember that no visitor cars are allowed to drive down New Road into the village centre. As one of the Yorkshire coast's most captivating and picturesque villages, Robin Hood's Bay has become a tourist magnet in recent decades, and can easily become overwhelmed with the large visitor numbers, particularly in the summer. We're here fairly early in the morning today. It's just gone about 9 o'clock, but during the day, the streets of Robin Hood's Bay are always bustling with visitors, while the beach is also a favoured seaside spot for many in the region. Still, with few cars in the village centre and the eye-catching layout of its higgledy-piggledy lanes, visiting Bay often feels like stepping into a time machine, a feeling which is without doubt one of its biggest charms of all. But Robin Hood's Bay is more than just a pretty face, and its swashbuckling history of smuggling pervades through the streets, now occupied by calm holiday homes. As we mentioned, smuggling was the dominant business here in the 18th century, but it wasn't always that way. After fishing families settled this area in the 14th century, Robin Hood's Bay actually grew into quite a significant fishing port. It traded extensively with the Netherlands across the North Sea, and in the late medieval era, Robin Hood's Bay had become even more important than Whitby. However, come the 18th century, that all changed, as a major rise in import taxes by the British government heavily impacted the village's economy and industry. The tax hikes were to fund Britain's wars with France, but the higher import duties made many commodities too expensive to trade. Inevitably, this led people to resort to illegal smuggling, buying and selling goods without paying import duties to the authorities. Again, Robin Hood's Bay flourished in the smuggling era, with all manner of products, including tea, brandy, silk, and gin, brought in from continental Europe. Arriving on the shore where we began our walk, smugglers would then make their way through the tunnel through the village towards the road over the moors to Pickering, slipping out of the gaze of the authorities. Over time, the police grew ever more aware of the operation in Robin Hood's Bay, which became one of the most notorious bases of smuggling in all of Yorkshire. However, with almost all of the village in on the business, and with smugglers able to shake off men of the law by diving into the maze of alleyways that make up Bay, there was little the authorities could do to bring down such a sizable smuggling game. Smuggling remained the centre of life in Robin Hood's Bay until the early 19th century, but the industry began to subside after the government eventually dropped the higher import taxes. And with that, Bay's historic fishing industry came back to life once again. In the 20th century, the local focus gradually shifted towards tourism, with a significant proportion of houses in the centre of Robin Hood's Bay now taken up by holiday homes. We're now walking along Chapel Street, once upon a time known as Lower Street, as it was situated lower down than the old main route towards the sea. Overlooking King's Beck, this was once the edge of the centre of Robin Hood's Bay, with New Road beneath us a later addition to the village. But even with the building of New Road, Robin Hood's Bay remains well hidden in this narrow valley, shrouded from view from above by the trees and foliage that surround us. Using the natural surroundings to its advantage, the village is much like the hideout that Robin Hood and his merry men themselves are said to have used in Sherwood Forest. And that brings us to the name of this village, and where its association with England's most famous outlaw comes from. As you'd expect, the origin of the name Robin Hood's Bay is very much the stuff of legend. One story is that Robin Hood himself came to the rescue of the villagers here after French pirates looted their boats. It's said that Hood arrived, took the pirates' loot, and after driving them back into the sea, he gave it all to the poor of the village. That's just one story though. Sherwood Forest, the legendary home of Robin Hood, is today about 100 miles south of here. But the forest once extended much further across England, With that in mind, it's said that Hood once kept a boat in this village, perhaps used whenever he needed to flee the country. The reality, however, is that Robin Hood, if he ever actually existed, probably never came anywhere near Robin Hood's Bay. But the village's name certainly captures its swashbuckling story of smuggling perfectly. We've now made our way out of the narrow lanes of Robin Hood's Bay, and we find ourselves atop the rather more modern sea walls, which offer some stunning views of the coast here. The North Sea is glistening and calm on this wonderful summer's morning, but it's worth remembering that, of all the perils endured by the people of Robin Hood's Bay, the sea is the most dangerous. The waves of the North Sea have been chipping away at the coast here for millions of years, and as we have already mentioned, a major part of the village fell into the sea in 1780. In response to the threat of further collapses, Robin Hood's Bay was fortified by these immense sea walls in 1975, which were strengthened again in 2003. That keeps the village safe from the ever-present threat of coastal erosion that was historically the ultimate peril facing Robin Hood's Bay. However, not all of the old main route through the village, known as King Street, was lost to the sea back in 1780. This road is what's left of King Street, home to the Dolphin, one of the oldest pubs in Bay, with a history dating back to the 16th century. The pub was built here on what was once the main artery of Robin Hood's Bay, and which leads us back down towards Coble Head, past the Men's Institute. Housed in a building of 1810 that was originally built as a lodge for people in poor health to rest, in 1919 this became Robin Hood's Bay Men's Institute, established in recognition of the local men who fought in the First World War. And later on in the 20th century, the men of Robin Hood's Bay came up with a new village tradition. At midday every Sunday, a cannon is fired from the top of the cliff across the bay. Though it may surprise unsuspecting visitors, it's designed to remind the landlord of the pub at the top of the village that it's opening time. All because the landlord apparently once forgot to open up on a Sunday about 30 years ago. Passing by the old village post office at the bottom of King Street, we now find ourselves back at Coble Head, which is also a well-known place among walking enthusiasts. This point in Robin Hood's Bay is the starting or ending point of Alfred Wainwright's famous coast-to-coast walk, a 192-mile route that traverses England from here to the village of St Bees in Cumbria on the country's west coast. Whether you're starting or finishing the walk in Robin Hood's Bay, a great place to stop is the Bay Hotel, once upon a time known as the New Inn, and which has a history dating back to 1828. One of the last remaining pubs in the village centre, it also overlooks the spectacular coast here, where we're now coming to the end of our walk. We started our tour of this magnificent village just under 20 minutes ago, but as we now look to the sea, you'll notice that the tide has come in quite noticeably in that short time. Just before the tide comes in, the beach is full of rock pools that make for a fun holiday activity, but some of the sands remain as yet unsubmerged, meaning you can still take a walk by the seaside here. Today a holidaymaker's dream, but once upon a time a village filled with outlaws, courageous fisherfolk, and bustling international trade, Robin Hood's Bay may only be a small place, but its history has been as action-packed as anywhere else you'll find on this captivating coastline. And as we look over the spectacular bay that once gave life to local fishermen and protection to crafty smugglers, we've now reached the end of our walk through the fascinating and picturesque village of Robin Hood's Bay. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you're now looking forward to visiting magical Robin Hood's Bay for yourself in the future.